So today's panel, we're going to look at some of the detail around how we deliver that CVS framework and look at that real practical support that everybody asked for in those consultation sessions. And two of those key elements that were seen as the real key enablers of adoption to connected vehicle services were data and standards. So to start, I'm going to go to Mark Pleydell, because Mark, I know you've got a bit of an update on DSIS and how it can help us build on what we've already got in place.
Thank you, Kerry. I warned Kerry and my fellow panel members that I might take a little bit of a run-up at this. During the course of this morning, we've heard pretty much to a man and woman, everyone mention either standards or foundations or not reinventing things or generally saying we've got to build on this. I spoke to a number of the local authorities this morning as well, Ian from Blackpool over there, amongst others, thank you. And the message that I've taken away from that is we must think about all the assets we have and ensure they're fit for purpose and operational, because if the foundations are weak, it doesn't matter what we put on top of them. We'll still be spending all our time and money patching them up. So although, apologies, Kerry, I'm here to talk about DSIS, because I have a role with Topaz, the Traffic Open Products and Specifications Group, which develops standards. Let me start that again. When you go to France and you walk down the pavement and you go to cross the road, you know you're in France, ditto Germany, Italy, etc. What is it about being a road user in the UK that makes it distinctive? It's not European standards, it's not international standards. There's a raft of things that sit around and below TSRGD, I hope all of you know what TSRGD is, that define the very British way we do things. And it's important we maintain those because the public, the road users, are familiar with them. If you disrupt the way in which people see their network, see their journey, change the information you give them, it falls apart. It gets worse. So, again, thanks, Ian. You can change the signal timings a little at a junction, and most people will roll with it. But if you change the sequence with which you bring up the signals, you get a lot of complaints. And of course, the people who control the money are the councillors who are voted for, and they don't like complaints. So why am I saying all this? Because before we start looking at what else we can wring out of the assets we've got, can we please make sure that they are stable and reliable with standards that are easy to use to make, Joe just said it, procurement easier, interoperability, procurement confidence, user confidence. Standards are the baseline. They don't stop you doing things. They give you confidence that the easy stuff is secure. Okay, so going down to the roadside level then, most of us here are worried about assets, so we're worried about network management. We've heard about journeys and people moving through the network. As an individual, I want my journey to be smooth and seamless. As a network manager, what I want is my whole network to run smoothly. Yeah? And then I start asking, well, what controls do we have? We've heard a lot about data and policies, and that's all important. But ultimately, you've got lights on sticks that tell people to stop and go. Yeah? And those are the things that actually help you move people across crossings or traffic through junctions, through the network. And now, you rest assured, Kerry, I'm getting to DSIS now. DSIS, Digital Controller Interface Standard. Traffic controllers, those boring grey cabinets that you're supposed not to notice when they're doing their job properly, take a lot of information in. They take it in from detection. And brief segue back to Topaz. There is work in Topaz to develop standards for detectors which look like connected vehicle data so that we can converge connected vehicle data and roadside asset data into systems that want to consume that to optimize the network. So Topaz isn't just about what we've got now, it's about where we're going. So back to those grey cabinets by the road. Inside there, there's a lot going on. And what comes out is that the lights change. And there's a massive opportunity being missed because the information that those controllers hold can inform many other systems. So DSIS. DSIS is a standards development activity in 3 parts. The first part answers a really simple question. How many signalised junctions and crossings are there in the UK? Because, sorry everybody, right now, we don't know. But it's a standard way of presenting that information. The next layer, and I think this will be news to, or good news to one or two of the DFT people, is that we need to know the lanes into and out of the conflict zones that make up these junctions and crossings. And for that, we're using the C-Roads MapM. So we're not reinventing a wheel, we're simply taking something off the shelf and saying, that will do nicely, thanks. And then the third part is each site, each controller is configured specifically for that T-junction, that roundabout, that location. We're taking the configuration information and we're putting it in a standard form, and that static information will let you predict what that controller is going to do. If you give that model the inputs, a model built that information the inputs, you will know what's coming next. And then lastly, over the top of that, we're putting a layer to export live information from controllers. Because the static information, this will happen, then that will happen next, and that will happen next, is one thing. But what's actually happening now in that controller is incredibly valuable. Not just GLOSA, which we all should have a reasonable working knowledge of, but all the other things, the fault states, the maintenance information, and actually the modes of operation. Am I under UTC control or am I under local control? What am I doing? Where am I going next? So the DSIS project is developing those three areas. Currently, most of our focus is in that last area. We have done most of the intersection summary, how many sites are there. We're working currently with Imperial College on automating MapM generation, lanes in and lanes out of the site. And within the project team itself, and I should acknowledge Peter Outledge of IRC here.
To interrupt you so we can
no, that's
get
fine, Kerry. I said to you,
now.
call my name and I'll stop. So at that stage, DSIS is a way of ensuring that the existing infrastructure aligns with the connected vehicles. So that's how it picks up with the thread here of connectivity and right, I've stopped. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. And can I now take that to Mark Cartwright? And Mark, can you give your take on that, please, and where UTMC fits?
Is this on? Yes, it is. Yes, I can. When we started doing UTMC far too many years ago, I gave you a metaphor of zipping things up. Purpose of UTMC was and remains to remove barriers in linking things together, make things more seamless, more interoperable, therefore more usable, and create opportunities for new services, new supply opportunities, and new usage opportunities by traffic managers. That remains the case. In the beginning, we had to go right from the very bottom of the zip and start saying, do we have plugs the same shape that enable us to do things together? A lot has happened in that bottom level since. We started off not even knowing we were going to be using the internet protocol as a means of communication, and that's happily now a long way in the past. But there's also a much greater range of standards, both industry standards and formal standards out there, that provide a huge amount of what Mark has called the foundations of this in place. And we're very happy, of course, now that Topaz exists and that things like DSIS are emerging as a means of holding, from a UK perspective, the technology standards that we think we know we need. That enables me to, in the UTMC space, to pull the zip up a couple of layers. And this is good for me. I'm happy with this because I'm going to come back again to Jo and what she said about the local authority perspective, which is they don't want to think about data and stuff. That's all supplier stuff. They should be dealing with that. And to what Darren says about being able to link his WhatsApp between his two types of phone, I'm interested now in the description of WhatsApp, not in the protocols that enable the WhatsApp on the Android to talk to the operating system and so on. And so what I now see UTMC as being, and this has been trailed at previous TTF events if you've been to them, which you should have been, because they're good, is as being the next level down from what Darren has put up there as service definitions for connected vehicles. So if you're saying, will enhance road safety for vulnerable road users, what does that actually look like in terms of something that a local authority can say, can we go and buy a project to do this? What does the system look like? How does that work with our existing architecture? What suppliers do we need to get involved? How do we need to change our business processes in order to do that service? and rely on the fact that people like Mark have got all the technology underpinning it to do that. There is one tweak to that, which is that a lot of the international standards are very grand and all-embracing and do need a lot of profiling. It's not going to be our job to do that, but it will be our job, I think, to identify where that needs to happen, to filter that down to appropriate technical people in order to say, you know what, as a UK, we probably need to do these bits of that.
So we've got a plan. We've got a plan in terms of what infrastructure do we have now and how do we make that a strong foundation. We've got a plan in terms of how do we now go out and look at standards that we can bring in and kind of develop and use for CVS framework. But if we move that along now, and I'm conscious that we want to try and get some audience questions, there's also a lot going on around digital traffic regulation orders and the benefit that that brings to the road user, the road network operator. So Paul, and by the way, and panellists, feel free to kind of chat between yourselves as well and kind of bring that conversation through. But Paul, your update on D-TRO?
Well, Mark's inspired me, actually, to go back to the history. We need to think, you know, for 10 or 15 minutes about the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984.
We haven't got 10 or 15 minutes.
No, I just wanted to say, first of all, that D-TRO is going great guns. We've had over 70,000 orders submitted to the service. We've had over 80 highway authorities submit into the service. So there's like over a 50% chance that your organisation has submitted something to the service already. But no, to get to the question in hand about connected services, I mean, I was driving around the mean streets of Hackney the other day, because that's the kind of life I lead, Jonathan, and all the parking bays were until 11:30 at night in the area where I was. It would have been amazing if I'd have had a connected car to tell me that there was some 6:30 bays around the corner. That's what I needed.
We do have a service for that, by the way.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're happy to feed into that, no worries. Or if you think about speed limits, you know, that speed limit data from D-TRO, I was driving along the road near me the other day and people were doing 20 miles an hour because Google was stating it was a 20 when it's a 30 mile an hour road. So we can help get that accurate information out to services. If you think about the loading bays project that's happening at the moment, if you think about bridge heights, that's a key thing for D-TRO. You know, that might not be within traffic orders, but we can get data beyond traffic orders into the D-TRO service and get accurate information to services for open data for free about bridge height. So there's loads of opportunities, I think, Kerry.
Sorry, I was expecting you to carry on speaking then. I was miles away.
I thought I'd break the habit.
The next thing. Jonathan, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I do, and actually it fits in with everything, what everyone said, what Mohammed had said about not reinventing the wheel, Darren and these guys as well about, you know, using what we've got as well as leveraging new technologies. And actually the services ontology and framework covers a lot of these items, and part of our job has been to, in the background, make sure we're linking all these various aspects of what's around now in standards, what we might be able to cherry pick from Europe, and what we might be able to cherry pick from our own backyard in terms of D-TRO, and actually finding novel ways to make sure we visualize that in a friendly way that people can relate to against KPIs and what they want to do to meet particular greener transport, safer transport, lower infrastructure costs. And we do have on our stand too, a quick plug, we've got a bit of a visualization of that to try and bring that data to life, and we'll very much welcome people's inputs into that and say, that's great, but I'd really like to see this, is that possible? And we can continue to capture that, as well as tomorrow when we do the little workshops after the demos as well. But one of the key things is that some of that guidance will enable you to see what the standards are, and also then where people have done it before, either in our backyard in the UK, but also in Europe, and give local authorities that confidence and lower risk that these have been done before, using, like you said, in some of the signalised intersection, using current accepted standards, and ultimately it will work. It will work first time, generally, and ultimately as well, it will work across borders, both not just in Europe, but actually within our own, you know, regional borders. So that's something that we're doing where people haven't got to wade through loads of technical data. They can get to that answer via the way that Darren's shown through the Manual for Smart Streets.
No, definitely. And I think that was one of the key things that were taken away from those workshops, is that how do we take that business case and how do we give local authorities the confidence to have that sort of information to provide the justification that they need to go forward with them. Mark, you look like you had a point there.
Picking up on the, Darren mentioned export opportunities, and standards do more than help us procure internally. We've had inquiries in the DSIS project about taking the processes into Ireland, into India, further afield, as a way of developing the same models for network management. DSIS will generate accessible data on what signalized junctions are doing, how many there are, how you move through them. That's not a UK-specific thing. That's a generally valuable asset. And from the research we've done, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel if someone else has done it, we're not seeing anyone else doing this yet. The UK is at the front edge of this one. I think we should recognise that some of the things we do really are quite up there and quite special.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We are the furthest ahead in that D-TRO space. So we're working with the Norwegians, the Dutch, we've even spoken to the Japanese. When we go to a meeting in Europe, they say, not to be funny, but sort of thank God you're here, because like you've actually done it. They want us in the room. So yeah, we are at the cutting edge of these things.
Mark, do you had a point?
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell everybody what they want, kind of. I look at what has been said about the Manual for Smart Streets and think it's not probably the case that its main users will be people that come in at the top at the policy level and try to trickle down. It's probably somebody has had a conversation with a colleague somewhere and thinks, well, that's an interesting project, and then goes into the middle and say, where does that fit? Which things do I think that supports? Is that primarily a safety thing or an environmental thing? And explores so at a project level, what they can sell in policy terms up to their directors or whatever, and in terms of what kind of systems exist in the marketplace to do it. So that probably says something about the mindset with which the entries in the MFSS should be constructed.
Is that a good plug for you, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that we've borne in mind, that you've got to be able to come at from as well different angles, but it's got to be able to be at that angle. And actually, some of them, the applications that sit underneath these more general services might give people ideas that they hadn't thought of. And they might be good ones where, well, actually, when I could see those benefits related to that, that's something that I know I can sell, and I didn't know it was already oven ready and available. So again, and what we do is that we clearly show if there's other platforms that already done that, we show people, at a glance, where they could go and access that information. And a part of it is, to me, is empowering local authorities as well with that knowledge, to climb that knowledge, expertise, learning curve over the next couple of years, and have that confidence with suppliers, but then obviously allow suppliers to, grow the market. So, encouraging more and more people to implement at scale.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, did you have another point?
Yeah, if I can just supplement that. I don't know how many people in the room are part of the TSG, the Adept Traffic Systems Group, which is where traffic network managers, practitioners get together and explore solutions. Because we've heard a lot about, Joe said it, others have said it, about, in fact, our sponsors here have said it, about sharing knowledge across different areas and getting maximum value from it. There are in place already groups of people who sit down over their sandwiches and chew over, hey, how did you do this? That worked for us. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. So I think we shouldn't undervalue the informal communications we have. And I think Mark is right, that this is something that needs to happen closer to, forgive the cliche, the coalface. So I just wanted to put in that there are already channels there.
And in the work that Joe led, we did have, didn't we, Joe, the whole aspect from a couple of the groups about having regional champions and having that more informal, regular meeting, not to keep the energy, just keep the energy up, to share those ideas at that more human level.
To go into those groups and share the message, because they're keen to know, but they need to know it's happening. So the groups have got to know about each other before you can even begin to communicate, is I think what I'm saying here. And I had a quick word with Darren as he walked out towards coffee at the end of the last session about Manual for Smart Streets. And I said, can I respin that as being smart about our streets? We need to know what they are now before we can do more with them, if you like. So I just want people to think about how we understand what our streets are doing now, because if we don't, next becomes more problematic.
I'm really interested in that vehicle to infrastructure stream as well, be it getting information into traffic control centres. To speak about my other project, Street Manager, just for a second, desperate to get sort of real-time information into that service to give those network managers the ability to know what's going on in the network and in traffic control centres as well.
Well, DSIS, portable signals at work's got mentioned a couple of times this morning, but if you look at the things that disrupt networks, someone going out there and digging a hole in the road, slapping up cones and portable signals, reduces the capacity somewhat. It completely requires you to rebalance your network. Within DSIS, one of the things we are focusing on is how we represent not just that there are works there, which I think we'll see at the demo tomorrow, but the effect those works are having, how those signals are being controlled, what they're actually doing with the traffic on the network. So, sorry, that's a bit of a digging in, but it's the things that can go wrong with the network or the exceptional events. Again, Ian was talking to me about when they have a major event in Blackpool and suddenly they've got 60,000 people to get out of the city and away, and that's a bit of an ask. And so the techniques that are being used to deal with unusual circumstances, sorry, Shane next to him as well, I know he's part of the team too. So we need to look at not just the everyday, but what goes wrong and how we deal with that, how we get that information, Paul's point, quickly, so that the systems can respond to it appropriately.
I was just going to say, Kerry, it reminded me as well that as we further over the next coming months, develop the common connected architecture or the services architecture around this, is to make sure that the marks and people are in the room that can give us that sage advice about how to best structure some of that.
And so that we do have a chance to get some feedback from people in the room today, if I ask for one final very, very quick point from anybody, if you've got another point, Mark?
I took my time at the beginning. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.
Yeah, my turn now. Can I add one other thing in which we've not discussed yet at all, I think, and which will be relevant in connected services and will, in its nature, affect how they are technically implemented in strange ways, and that's the ergonomics of the surface. And I'm thinking of things like, if you're providing information about local disruptions, how do you do that in such a way as engages with the traveller but doesn't provide too much overload or distraction and so on? Because all that will affect the kind of things like detail and presentation and mechanism. Don't want to get into that, just to put it out there.
Thank you. Paul, anything else from you before we move to questions?
Oh, just that idea, I think, of combining Mark's work with DSIS and D-TRO and street manager data and bus open data into that traffic control centre.
We are piggybacking on D-TRO. It's our way into getting stuff out to the public. Thanks, Paul.
Jonathan?
No, and just finally, very much welcome people's inputs, both on the stand but also tomorrow, to get that feedback, and, we can then, slowly improve how we're getting that real customer view about what people might need, and we can then go out and do some show and tells with people and get that further refinement over the coming months.
Yeah, and that consultation is going to continue as we develop and kind of build this project. So is there any questions? We've got Keely and Claire available with microphones if anyone has any questions for the panel.
Thank you. Dominic Brown from Highways Magazine. Question for Paul, specifically on D-TROs. Has there been any decision about extra burden funding from the DfT? We've heard from quite a few councils that have said it is putting quite a bit of pressure on their capacity. Question for all of the panel. I don't know quite how to phrase this, but what kind of a gap do you think you need to leave when you're setting the service standards between the general narrative and actually going in and setting like specific benchmarks and figures and numbers? Where do you see that gap being? Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. We're working so hard with the LGA and MHCLG around new burdens, but I don't quite have the announcement to make today. But rest assured, I was literally in a meeting at 4 o'clock yesterday when I got here working on it, so we're close. We're close, sir. Standards?
Standards are an enabler, Dominic. So forgive me, everybody, I hate to trivialize, but think Lego bricks. If the bricks all fit together, you can build whatever you want. So I think the standards are the means, and they make sure that the bits fit together. They're not the end.
No, and I was just going to add to that. There's some areas in the architecture where you can basically leave people to do what they want and what they need to do in their existing implementations or future implementations. They've got that covered. And then there's other areas where you do need to, like say, hone down a bit on the guardrails, as we called it, because otherwise you won't able to, like you say, Mark says, the bits of Lego then won't fit together. So where it's critical they fit together perfectly, that's where we put the tighter specifications in.
I'm going to give exactly the same answer as they've given, which is the same answer as we've been giving in UTMC for forever, really, which is that it's a suck it and see thing. We are not going to be proposing specific requirements unless there is an obvious benefit in doing so. For all sorts of reasons, you get better, faster introductions if you don't over-constrain. You get better opportunities for suppliers to demonstrate USPs. You get better take-up if you're not over-constraining the requirements from purchasers in terms of what they need to buy and so on. So as we go through this process of starting to get the services rolled out, we will learn more about what is essential and what's nice to have and what should be left optional, and only at that point should we be making those decisions.
Thank you. And another question? Sam, I can see Sam over there.
Sorry, thanks for the panel. I won't ask a technical question, but increasingly we're talking about growth and how these technologies in transport, and you talked about UK being, I guess, a leader in this, in kind of that international context. So my question is to the panelists is very much, what can we do as local authorities and public sector to support this ecosystem to grow and for us to sell better internationally? Are we doing the right work in terms of packaging the solutions? And, I want to see, this is before my time, Scoot and Mover, those scaled to all sorts of places internationally. How do we do this?
Just one aspect, which again, Sam, isn't a technical answer, but one of the things that often is quite useful, and obviously it's been great through our work with Steve Narroway, that we've got the D-TRO team now representing a particular working group on META and traffic regulation orders, is that, in some certain areas, for example, on C roads, there's a group all about urban transport and adapting connected services, for the urban environment, away from the motorways, because it's a very different problem to solve. And having UK voices at that and showing what you're doing and of value, there's a really open attitude to having those ideas. People sometimes think, oh, well, that standard's very specific. But actually, they would really welcome UK ideas and innovation because they've always respected our ideas in the ITS field in particular.
If ever there was a feed line, it was that one. Next year, 2027, where's Andy Graham? He's probably hiding at the back. We have a World Congress here in the UK, a chance to showcase the things we do. So for local authorities, if you are solving the problems you've got, using kit that is interoperable, meets standards, and delivers outcomes, that's really simple, but boy, is it effective. Look, we fixed it. Look, we fixed it again. Look, we fixed it over there too. And that approach is worth a lot. Then you can start to lay over the top of it, and we're learning about what's happening, and we're getting more data out. And turning that data into something that helps us, whether automated systems or whether by simply observation of what our networks are doing. So there's a target for everybody. Get some systems in that are solving straightforward but common problems. Ian's problem again. When a footy ground chucks out, you've got 50,000, 30,000, 50,000 people all wanting to do that. Yeah? So think about managing your network to deal with that every fortnight down the road at the footy ground, and so on. Sorry,
that's a great example because major events is one of the services in a particular category. So, if it is certainly something that, would fit well in the existing CVS, and then you implement and shape it as you see fit.
We didn't plan that.
We've got time for one very
Sorry,
last
can I
quick question.
just come back on that as well? I think, again, supporting these people, do what you do. Use the systems that you have available. The only thing I would add to that is, and this is something which is very difficult in any organisation, local authorities not accepted, which is make sure you give yourselves time to think about what you're doing and to capture why it is you're doing it that way. Because there's too much temptation to get your head down and deal with the operational problems of today, to ignore all the noise that's going out up there because it's just a nuisance. And that's not the way you either convince yourself that you're doing it the right way or get yourself into the right frame of mind to be positive about it.
Thank you. Was there any final questions before we...
Tim from Capsh. The slightly different topic, but in the context of connected vehicles, it strikes me that this all works an awful lot better if we get the OEMs, the vehicle manufacturers, on side, at the risk of sounding like a certain American president. What leverage do we have? What leverage do we have over those guys to get them part of this solution?
I'll have a go at that if you like. I think a really important number here is, I think it's 10 billion US per year. That figure, I believe, is the global automotive R&D budget. So the answer is none. There are times when you have to accept you've got to follow, but it's in their interests to come up with an aligned solution. So as long as they get their act together, that's got to be an open solution, therefore it's accessible. And I think when we get into the nitty-gritty of what vehicles are doing, we don't have the leverage. It would be silly to pretend we have.
Yeah, I think from a D-TRO point of view, it's just about setting those standards with Europe and trying to make sure we're aligned, and what D-TRO does goes into the kind of overall European and world level manual, really, and having a consistent standard. That's why we're speaking to the Welsh as well, the Scots, the Northern Irish, so it doesn't stop at the English border for starters. But yeah, you're right, it is a big issue.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry, I'm conscious everyone's desperate to get to lunch, so is it really important?
One more second. I think that the problem may not be quite as bad as that, because they are interested in actually getting connectivity to themselves as OEMs anyway. So it's more a question of persuading them. There are some bits of it which it would be quite nice if they allowed us to have in some accessible format. And where they can see a benefit for their own users, possibly money, but a benefit for their own users in short or long term, then there may be an easier case in point. So, for example, one thing that motorists hate is potholes. And so if you can get information back about pavement conditions, maybe that's something that they would be relatively open to discuss. If you want stuffing about vehicle health, then obviously not.
Yeah, and there's projects on the site. We can have a Romo project. Romo 2 is a good example where the Dutch, okay, the UK aren't, but the Dutch are interfacing quite a lot of manufacturers, like you say, to get them in that mindset, and that there could be a market for that.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to close questions. If there were any questions that we missed, please feel free to chat to our panellists at lunchtime. We're almost there now. We're almost at the lunch break. But just before we finish, just a very quick summary in terms of what we've kind of seen from this last session. And I think really we're at a really positive and really exciting time in the delivery of connected vehicle services. The sector's aligned, and we're really at that stage now where we're able to start moving along to the next stage. And tomorrow you're going to see some really, really good examples of how that technology is either already in place or is very, very near to market. And we're really starting to see some of these things now come to life. What I think we've heard really clear today is that connected services isn't about replacing everything and starting fresh. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about building on the existing infrastructure we've got, making that really stronger, making sure we've got those really good foundations to start to move forwards. Throughout all the consultation sessions, standards and practical guidance came out really, really clearly, and hopefully you'll see from today that we've taken that consultation on board. We're looking at how we can support that through developing manual for smart streets and having a place where we can provide that confidence for local authorities to go to find all that information they need in supporting the adoption of these services. So can I please ask you to thank our panel for their insights this afternoon?